Perfect. So firstly, I'd also like to acknowledge the Yagara and Turrbal peoples as the traditional custodians of the land upon which I'm meeting you from today, and I pay my respect to their elders past and present. I recognise and respect that these lands have always been places of teaching, research and learning. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Adele, and I'd like to welcome you all here today where I will discuss my research, which is titled Careful Aggression, so an art of unlearning, experimenting with kinetic excess through Muay Thai boxing. And so before I begin, I would like to stipulate that I use the terms woman and sportswoman interchangeably. That's to refer to a matter of subject positioning, and I note the limitations of dualistic categories of gender for non-binary self-identification. I also believe it is important to make explicit the more consensual and contractual nature of sport-based violence as differentiated from the systematic oppression of marginalised identities through the sustained acts of symbolic and physical violence. A little bit about the research context. So Muay Thai is recognised as the national sport of Thailand, and this striking system is a stand-up form of fight sports, which is also referred to as the art of 8 limbs, since it allows the use of elbows and knees in addition to punches and kicks. So this project argues that the disruptive potential of kinetic excess is generated by the movements characteristic of Muay Thai, in that they provide an alternative experience to the narrow articulations of bodily comportment that is entangled within Eurocentric idealized femininity and the normative imperatives that entails of fragility, passivity, and making oneself smaller. So the aims of this research underpin a concerted effort to unsettle hidden logics which associate masculinity with physical capability and aggression, and importantly, femininity with caring and passivity. So it draws on an embodied workshop methodology, which was conducted with 14 women who had little to no experience of the full contact practice of sparring. And I argue that such a methodological endeavour can mobilise the paradoxical tensions of careful aggression as a dynamic force in and of itself. So as the literature demonstrates, feminist engagement with fight sports is often ambivalent, given that the masculine history of combat and the achievement of self-transformation at the expense of another exists in tension with these possibilities of women's empowerment. So as Ahmed states, to be a feminist killjoy is not to be positioned above or beyond what you question. And it must be noted that for some, there remains an unresolvable tension between fight sports and violence that seems irreconcilable. So the long and difficult feminist struggle to politicise gender-based violence as rooted primarily in social rather than natural or individual causes centres efforts within feminist theory to problematise the link between violence and masculinity. Hegemonic masculinity. So understandably, there is this ambivalence towards exploring potential alternative meanings and experiences of aggression and aggressive energies, competition, and these sorts of endeavours. So the focus of this research is in mobilising that tension, analysing the ways in which the friction between the highly gendered performative concepts of care and aggression can be instrumentalised to open up alternative modes of becoming otherwise. So in the years since I first entered a fight gym in 2010, significant changes have taken place across Muay Thai and fight sports globally. However, insights from my professional practice as a fighter, coach, and researcher, as well as the boxing literature, point to the need for feminist spaces and practices for those who would like to engage with this physical culture more fully. So although there is a plethora of scholarship in investigating the broader aspects of boxing culture, research surrounding how these movements become engendered, particularly through the sparring relationship, remain under-researched. So this project emerged out of this desire to open up fight spaces and create access for women who want to engage in combat sports more fully. So with these aims in mind, this research experiments with these movements outside of the hyper-masculine space of a traditional fight gym in an Australian context. So a 6-week fight camp was developed as an invitation to move from boxing for fitness to sparring in the ring. So while women-only fight camps are not unique, this particular program was less concerned with the absence of men and more focused on developing a feminist approach to boxing, coaching and research that work to open up the space. So from this perspective, it is important to caution against the potential of women's programs to re-territorialise a new hierarchy of gender performance through which women weaponise their bodies as the path to empowerment. So this research is not an evaluation of a feminist boxing program. Rather, this dual focus of enacting boxing and research together to produce a pedagogy that values experimental affective methods. So in this sense, my thesis traces this dual focus to think with theory about my coach researcher experience as a generative practice of moving, knowing, and writing. So I was less interested in identifying constraints or enablers as such, and more concerned with what fighting can do to disrupt gender normativity through both a coaching pedagogy and a research approach that enacts a careful ethics of movement. So this study engages post-qualitative inquiry to experiment with participatory action research, which is entangled within the lived everyday experiences of becoming a fighter, with a key focus surrounding coach-athlete dynamics and hopefully flattening those dynamics. And my interest lies in developing a relational understanding of the affordances of Muay Thai as embodied unlearning through the full force of the moving body. So post-qualitative research, according to Mazzy, is conceived not as a method with a script, but as that which emerges as a process methodology, as happening in the middle of things, in the threshold, as theoretical concepts and data constitute one another in our analytical practice of thinking. So the departure point should not be read The departure point from different genres of qualitative inquiry should not be read as a break from the legacy of previous feminist thought. What is different, however, is the ways in which such an approach embraces the inseparability of ethics, ontology, and knowledge. So whilst this type of inquiry is not clear-cut nor without challenges, I argue in favour of the productive uncertainties mobilised by the flexibility of this creative critical approach. So in this way, I acknowledge the indeterminacy and the messiness of research practices and attempt to account for the complex ways a fighter is produced through entangled relations. So in returning to embodied movement through this post-qualitative approach, the project was guided away from the collection and representation of data about women's boxing and towards an experimentation with the transformative affects of research relations, that is moving and being moved in unexpected ways. So a relational approach to women's involvement in becoming fighters concerns understanding the social relations of affect that shape their embodied experiences of fight camp. So I draw upon a feminist new materials framework that emphasises the multiplicity of subjectivity, that we contain multiple selves, and it engages a long-standing feminist investment in the agency of material. Through such a lens, these moments of unlearning are explored through the ways in which gendered inequalities are felt. Exploring the excess and intensity of boxing requires a feminist theorisation of affect to surface the gendered power relations that are imbricated in embodied capacities as a collaborative entanglement of muscles, memories, sweat, images, objects, desires, and technologies, among many others. So whilst affect is inherently difficult to define, emphasis here is not so much on what affect is, but what it does, or rather, what does the body know? Experimenting through and with movement, as well as audiovisual data and interviews, the overarching aims are informed by the following research questions. So primarily, how does the kinetic excess characteristic of Muay Thai boxing teach practitioners to unlearn normative gender roles by changing the way we feel and know through embodied movement? So as a process methodology, the conceptual terrain traverses diverse lines of inquiry and different literatures. And however, I will take a moment to outline kinetic excess as a central concept. So the kinetic excess generated through the corporeal exchanges required of Thai boxing, suggest Schissel 2019, are ways of encountering a different proximity to others through enacting different postures, gestures, and uses of the anatomy. So put simply, fight sports such as Muay Thai can provide the opportunity to experience the body in new and exciting ways. Hence, the dual focus as feminist coach researcher is concerned with asking, what can the affective intensities of becoming fighter do, and are there implications for the pedagogic relations of coaching? So I therefore plug kinetic excess into theorizations of affect to surface a more materialist understanding of how we explore Fight Camp and how Fight Camp can work to disrupt narrow articulations of idealized femininity. So this emergent research design very much happened in the middle, with methodology and professional practice informing how the first phase emerged. So the recovery from the economic impacts of COVID-19 and mid-2020 reconfigured the space and the ways in which myself and my partner, Coach M, operate our Thai boxing and personal training business from a home-style gym setup. So interestingly, the home gym defamiliarized the fight space in a way that enabled different women to see themselves in this space in new ways. It was self-titled by the participants as the dungeon, and its informality blended industrial and domestic aesthetics, which distanced the space from the commercial logic of franchise sport and fitness facilities. 14 women identifying participants with no sparring experience self-selected to join. So this dual focus of a feminist coaching pedagogy and as a research approach was explained from the outset to the participants, and they were really keen to be involved. So the first series of fight camps took place in November to December 2020, and participants engaged in supervised partner work 3 times a week with a view to progressing to their first sparring experience at the end of the 6 weeks. The participants were diverse in terms of sporting backgrounds, and ages ranged between 19 to 52. And as you can see here, most of the participants stayed engaged in 10 more fight camps between January 2021 to March 2024. So each iteration of the fight camp informed the next, as feminist knowledge interacted with and through the affective coaching pedagogy. So within the research assemblage, I experimented with affect in multiple encounters, and often the apparatus shifted with each experimentation to deepen understandings about how we come to know and feel differently through movement, and also different ways of researching movement. So in facilitating a careful fight space, finding ways of minimizing anxieties participants may feel regarding the potential to hurt their partners, their training partners, or in turn be hurt, was a really important task, and I sought ways to responsibly work with tensions between participants' gendered histories and the combative physicality required of the training sessions. However, in answering Chadwick's call, in answering Chadwick's call to move beyond an idealization of empathy as a central affective principle underlying feminist research praxis, this research does not seek to safeguard established training practices, but rather the aim was to open up the space through orienting towards this feminist approach. As Chadwick writes, discomfort functions as a productive entry point for thinking about the affective politics of feminist research practices. So this approach includes an appeal to playful and consensual touching, breaking down proximity carefully, centering competition as cooperation, and acknowledgement of caring responsibilities. So what did this look like in practice? So I have a short video here. So whilst these techniques and instructional approaches are not unique, what is, however, is the positionality of coach researcher attuning to the embodied dynamics of learning coaching Thai boxing in terms of what these movement practices do and how they affect women in the process of becoming fighters. Rather than seek to provide a resolution of embodied tensions between kinetic excess and the discomforts of femininity, I linger with these affective moments in order that they might teach us something. So put another way, echoing Burford, I ask, what might bad feelings be good for? In discussing the following findings, I'd like to focus on getting ugly as a particular research moment that entangled the intensity of kinetic excess and the discomforts of transgressing normative gender ideals. So it was within the first fight camp, participants both described and experienced initial and often stifling hesitation in making noise or even exhaling, and discomfort around sweating when executing the kinetic excess required of the movements. The ways in which the embodied sound is used to assist athletic performance is a central aspect of martial arts, and noisy breathwork and its soundscape are a powerful embodied practice for enhancing mindfulness and performance through working to synchronize movement and often optimize energy expenditure. However, for many participants, when it came to engaging the sonic intensities of embodied sounds beyond speech, such as breathwork or making noise, it was often met with this discomfort. But also, becoming noisy amplified a different relation to aggressive energies, one that did something. It was the materiality of sound which worked to draw out desires for excessive embodiment. As Wilquire observes, a boxer in the ring is a being who screams, with all their heart, with all their body. I want to be someone, I exist. Vocalizing willful intent surfaced an affective atmosphere that supported participants to engage in this mode of expressive unbecoming. As Violet reflects in relation to being asked about the soundscape of fight camp, she describes how that when she first heard people were making these noisy breathwork, shouting on pads, she was a bit taken aback because they don't think that they're that out there. They're very reserved. And she states, yeah, but I do it now and it feels good. Like I get more power out of it. It's surprisingly weird, but good at the same time. I think I've never been around that sort of thing where we're supposed to be loud and aggressive and make that sort of noise. In becoming, participants desired a closer proximity to ugliness as they returned meaning-making practices to an alternative intense carriage of the body. In experimenting with discomforts, the phrase, oh, just get ugly with it, bubbled out. In coaching one participant through a leg kick drill, it required maximum exertion. And this was towards the end of the fight camp. So the technique was there, and you could almost say it was textbook, but there was still this kind of composure or this sense of holding back. So this cue just bubbled out as an invitation to just kind of let it go. So this effective coaching cue became an invitation to experience this excess required of the movement. It acted like a permission slip to allow for or create space for undoing gender notions of bodily comportment. And importantly, it was celebrated by the participants who started encouraging each other to not hold back. Getting ugly became this prompt that shifted the capacities of bodies to move and work through the participants' imagined gendered selves. Later interviewees in relation to being asked about this coaching cue and what it did to the movement in the space describe it as a rallying call, a permission slip, and also an invitation. For Catherine, embodied unlearning was heightened through the interactions of kinetic excess and these affective cues, describing how they felt so much more connected to my body when I'm making a noise, and it just comes out. You feel the extra power, and then you start to feel comfortable with it and use it as your tool. You're using all your tools at that point, but it is daunting. You have to hold space for it. It has to be supported. And you don't get to do that a lot, and doing it in a group of people where it's celebrated, it's good, ugly. Yeah, no one tells you that. I've been enjoying that. I've been shouting it too, get ugly. For me, it is very relieving. It's like relief and encouragement all in the same breath. Bella also describes how it was experienced simultaneously as a rallying cry and an invitation, stating how it rallied me. It made me want to put energy all the way from my toes to my fingertips because you invite criticism when you do that. But you saying that, get ugly, invites us to let that go. It was basically like saying, experience all of yourself like right here. You saying that was something so simple, but it means so much. And it felt like you saying that and us all very much relating with it. It's almost like a relief, permission granted. Ugly, it's an intense affective word, and although it's usually just used to describe appearance, there is always something more, an excess. As Storm reflects, yeah, fight camp, it's not pretty. You look back and you see that. Like if you're expecting these nice like ballerina photos, you're not going to get it. And it's not supposed to be pretty. So now we're aggressive and ugly. Well, ugly in the sense that, you know, that's the opposite of what we're taught to be. Becoming fighters and becoming ugly could also be read as a process of becoming intense. This intensity, this way of relating to the world that celebrates engaging the full force of the moving body in a willful manner, threatened to overwhelm normalizing urges at every turn, punch, and kick. Unlearning this pervasive and often unconscious interaction between legacies of othering the feminine as irrational, emotional, and hysterical continue to haunt the space, and often participants use the warm down as a way to share such experiences and debrief these gendered histories. Such research events pull the coaching researching body into wondering how we can discover ourselves and our desires in a world organized through reductionist binary categories that consistently co-construct limited, narrow, and oppressive articulations of desirable embodiment. Grounded in feminist and queer thought, Howard asks of ugliness as a concept that sets itself up to be the domain of difference. What would it mean to see worth in ugliness as a generative category for reimagining gender, sexual, and ethnic differences? In fighting to find new shapes, bodies within the fight camp assemblage reach for new arrangements of desiring bodies. The struggles of embodied resistance of dominant discourses surrounding idealized comportment have long been a central tenet of a feminist agenda. Traditionally, dominant cultural narratives work to erase, suspend, and disembody expression of struggle, exertion, and exhaustion. A feminist coaching pedagogy recognizes that intensive movements, such as Thai boxing, are generative of aesthetic labor, which can often arise in discomfort. While instructing participants to move through these intensities can often result in negative affective states, such as shock, pain, and fear, among others, the aim is not to provide a resolution or emancipation from oppressive gender ideals, but rather to work carefully with the intensities that may arise, to engender alternative ways of moving and, importantly, knowing the body. Just as Stein values the visibility of the struggle when it comes to writing, what we see in the elements of excess of becoming fighters are the ways in which getting ugly materialized as an effective pull of transformation, as effective reminders of the body's capacity to feel acutely and deeply, not the body as a problem to be solved, managed, or apologized for. Perhaps the relief and encouragement and permissive invitations come from learning to be attuned to the fact that this energetic material has been with us all along, showing, telling, rallying that beyond prepared matter is that non-reflective bodily space, before thought, cognition, and representation. Becoming intense asserts a fullness of self through with the shared experience of expressive movement or expressive unbecoming that does not only belong to moments of joy and pleasure, but also the sensations of discomfort, exhaustion, and pain. I argue that the contestation of fighting as a sole preserve of the masculine hero is not linear, nor as simple as embodying the physical capacities of strength, power, and aggression. Whilst kinetic excess may generate this always incomplete process of abjection, the potential rests in this disruption of subject-object-body relations. These visions of glimpsed forces might invite, rally, and slip us into new territories not yet experienced or even thought, or as Risa states, they might help us understand the oppressive hegemonies or normative in ways not widely imagined. Hence, I argue that discomfort is entangled with the disruption of normative gender performance. And I here return to Sarah Ahmed's point about comfort. That is, comfort is the effect of bodies being able to sink into spaces that have already taken their shape. Discomfort is not simply a choice or decision, I feel uncomfortable about this or that, but an effect of bodies inhabiting spaces that do not take or extend their shape. In this case, participants extended themselves through Muay Thai fight camps that informed an affective pedagogical orientation to the moving learning body. As coach researcher, these moments of discomfort were both disruptive and transformative, as I noticed my capacity to open others up to their own multiplicity. For the fight camp participants, these moments were also productive as their capacity to give and receive hits, to conceive of their body in a different way, to experience their body's limits, and to extract knowledge, wisdom, and solidarity from the reworking of pain expanded and reverberated throughout their lives. In opening up questions of embodiment to consider the role of affective dimensions, such as careful aggression, a more generative analysis might be enabled beyond empowered or oppressed interpretive claims. In revaluing and reclaiming the aesthetic labour of kinetic excess, I seek to deepen understandings of the ways in which becoming fighters generates affective potentialities, such as becoming intense, becoming noisy, and becoming vulnerable, which I explore throughout my thesis. Exploring the micropolitics of coaching and researching through the aesthetics of sensation, such as imagery, voice, and touch, is enmeshed with the potential to open up modes of expression that were previously unknown, closed off, or cast as undesirable when read in and against a heteronormative matrix of desirability. In fighting to find new shapes, bodies within the fight camp assemblage reach for these new arrangements of desiring bodies. Although it must be noted, participants, coaches, and researcher live these sensuous, affective moments together, but differently. Hence, through emotional discomfort lies the challenge, but also the opportunity to become otherwise. As a coach researcher, it is one thing to ask participants to transgress norms. It is another thing entirely to work with the more than or the excess of these movements carefully. So in conclusion, what is needed in boxing and in research are creative articulations of the complex relations that produce excess, rather than the essentializing representations of gender difference. A kinetically excessive movement life can generate moments of unlearning habitual movement patterns and postures that have materialized through normative gender ideals. In asking the question of what a body can do, we must also ask about the limits of the body. Women's bodies as gendered and historically marginalized and denied autonomy and space in the public realm, as well as being disciplined to adhere to restrictive beauty and behaviour regimes, need ways of opening themselves up to the tensions of both the inexhaustible capacity of life, but also the exhaustion of the task ahead. So coaching pedagogies in fight sports need to reflexively acknowledge that different bodies are often significantly changed in the unfamiliar territory of the fight gym and the reconfigured relationship to pain that is required in this space. So by way of acknowledging the generous collaboration and contributions of the participants, Coach M, and the supervisory team, I'd like to finish by reflecting on some memories as a coach researcher. So against, through, and over the ropes we go, fighting to find new shapes, slipping, exceeding these bodily spaces. We become open differently to the destructive force of another, to both give and receive hits, this uncoupling of caring and femininity and aggression and masculinity. Not unnatural, but unusual. Not to care less, but to care differently. Not without fear and friction. Power mobilized in knowing that's okay. These shapes need a place, a space, or the same. Lingering with moments of discomfort, overwhelming normalizing urges, encouraging the fulfillment of expansive potential. Towards a place beyond nice, the invitation appealing. A call to arms, legs, knees, and elbows, the art of 8 limbs, an art of unlearning. Thank you.